Hi, and welcome to another episode of FYI, the program that brings you the happenings in and around our great city of Laurel. We have movers, we have shakers, we have just ordinary people like you and me. But my guest today certainly qualifies as one of the movers and certainly one of the shakers. His name is Deacon Timothy.
How are you doing, Oliver?
I'm great. Great to have you on the show. Now, I could sit here and probably spend the better half of an hour talking about Deacon Tim because he's certainly been an inspiration in my life since I met him, but I'm going to let him talk about himself a little bit.
Thank you, Oliver, and good morning. I was told very recently at a revival when someone asked me how I'm doing, I need to remind myself and to remind you that I'm blessed and highly favored. But I am Deacon Timothy Tilm, and I serve at Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church in the Anacostia section of Southeast Washington, D.C. And it's something about the church that brings me here. My parents were married at the church 78 years ago. My grandparents were among the founding families of that church in 1920. But the church was an integral part of the neighborhood, and I've never forgotten that sense of neighborhood where parish or church and neighborhood were synonymous. And that's been a guiding force in my life, and that brings me to the table to sit down with you today, Oliver, and I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you're here. Now, what are the things that we're going to discuss today? I know you have some very wonderful things that you want to talk about, and so I'm going to let you lead off and bring us into the things that you want to talk about today.
Well, this is just about the church and the world, and there's a very simple thing. We hear the conversation today about the legacy of our last Pope, our Pope Emeritus, Pope Benedict XVI, and we're reminded that his legacy is the new evangelization, and that's representing the church so that people understand the fullness and the joy that you have of being part of that. But the new evangelization is nothing more than the old-time religion, and it's something that all of us have experienced in our life, and we need to recall that piece of our history and put it in the forefront of our minds so we can recreate that wonderful place that looks like the kingdom, and it's a place where everybody is comfortable and everybody has the chance to grow and to be, not just be all you could be, but being all you could be is being the person that God called you to be. So that's where we are.
Now, you talk about church. Now, I can sit at home and I can pray and I can talk to my God. Mm-hmm. Why is it necessary for me to go to church?
Well, we go back and think about the old-time religion. It's the teaching of the apostles. It's the breaking of the bread. It's the communal life. And it's the prayers. And there's something about being a part of a community. The greatest of all human needs is the need to belong to a community, to be in a family, whatever it is. The street gang is a distortion of that because there's anger, there's fear, and there's always unhealthy competition. But the church is that beloved community where everybody actually has a chance to grow and actually has a chance to be all they can be and to be accepted. And that's at the heart of who we are. So it's good to actually come back and see that and understand what it's like to be part of that.
What led you to want to become a deacon? Because I know, I've talked to people who said it is a great amount of study. What led you to want to become a deacon?
Well, people get called, and I was called because I had no intention of being a deacon. The first time somebody asked me, I said not only no, but I had some colorful language to go along with that. But I come to this seat out of my experience as a community organizer primarily, but I go back and look through my entire life and see that there's a common thread inside of that. Mm-hmm. And that common thread is the commitment to serve, the commitment to build the community. Mm-hmm. That's what I did in my 23 years in the Coast Guard, saving lives and making the world safe for democracy, as I'd like to say. That's what I do in the family business with my wife, Caring Transitions, helping seniors and families to move. But the real experience comes from being a community organizer, where I ask people, what is it that you believe, and how do you want to act on what you believe in the community? Mm-hmm. And people just played that back to me. It says, if you're going to ask me this question, Tim, you need to answer that. And as I asked that question over and over again, it says, this call to ordained ministry was an integral part of the answer. And it's an integral part of actually being the church. And the church is not so much what you see when you walk into the sanctuary, even though that's very, very important. The church is what you take into the world. It says you have this sense of self, you have this sense of a relationship with the supreme being, with a deity, and you take that into the world, and that influences how you engage other people. Mm-hmm. But you look for that image of that God, that perfect person, in every person that you encounter, and if you look hard enough for it, you're going to find it.
Mm-hmm. So now we're pretty much talking about faith there.
Yeah.
If we met 10 different people, their definition would probably be different of what faith is. My definition would probably be different than yours. What is Deacon Tim Tillman's definition of faith?
Always putting the guy on the spot. I like to go back to Pope Benedict's early writings when he talks about faith in his encyclical, Saved in Hope, Spe Salvi. But he talks about faith and he talks about hope and says that they're synonymous. Faith is that belief in things that are unseen, but when you have that belief in things that are unseen, it governs how you live, and you hope. You anticipate that life is going to be good, and you act out of that anticipation. Mm-hmm. So you build things, and people will say, well, this can't happen anymore. People have lost hope. My experience as a community organizer just turned that around, because I had gone into communities and I asked people the question, says, you're here, what is it you believe, and how do you want to see the things that you believe come to life in the place where you are? Mm-hmm. And I've seen ordinary citizens working with church people and other people in the neighborhood build family centers and build housing and do other things so that people's lives could be transformed. And it's one thing to look at the buildings, which were exciting, but the real thing was to look at people realize that because they believed in something, because they had faith, they had the power to transform. And I asked myself a question that kind of got me into the chair with you today. It says, if I could do those things as a community organizer, and we could build housing, and we could build recreation and community centers and rebuild neighborhood schools, what would happen if we applied that same idea to the church in the neighborhood? And that got me to this conversation about what would it take to do that? What if we applied community organizing principles to building the church in the neighborhood? And
well, speaking of faith, we know that, faith is not just something that you say, I have. What does people need to do to live out this faith that we talk about?
Well, people need to see themselves coming alive and bring the Word of God to life in the things that they do every day. And I'm drawn to this picture of church. Mm-hmm. And you see a couple things when you look at a picture. So I go into Mark's gospel and look. People are hungry for meaning in their life. People are hungry to be part of something. And even though we live in this world that everybody says is secular and it's all about individuals, that doesn't stop people from looking for meaning. And people just have this sense of hope. They want to grasp onto something. So everybody in the world was excited about the election of Pope Francis. It wasn't just the Catholics. Everybody in the world was excited about that, because there's the chance for something new. And there's the reminder that Christ always brings things that are new. But people look at the church and they see a couple of pictures, and one of those pictures comes in the Gospel of Mark in the 9th chapter, and this really came alive to me at a revival when Father Maurice Nutt pulled this piece out of Mark's Gospel in the 9th chapter, the 17th and the 18th verses. There's a man that was having a rough day in the neighborhood because his son was not feeling well. And he went to church, so to speak. He went and met with Jesus' disciples. And they did nothing for him. And then Jesus saw him, and he knew that the man was frustrated. So he called out to him and invited him to be in the conversation. And Jesus asked him, "Hey, what's going on with you?" And he answered, "I brought my son because he's possessed by a mute spirit. He falls on the ground. He convulses. He salivates. And I brought him to your disciples because I thought the disciples could get the demons out. And they couldn't." And people are walking into our churches every day with the hope that those who say they believe can help them do something. And the believers don't really see them or don't acknowledge what it is that's going on with them. And they walk away disillusioned. They walk away without any hope. When if you reach out to them and create that hope for them, their lives will be transformed. And the flip side of that comes up in Mark's Gospel. You ask the question, what is faith? If you go into the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 12, there's the story of the paralytic. There are many paralyzed people in the communities where we are. And it's not just that they can't walk. But this paralytic is out there, and 4 men see him. And they pick him up, and they carry him on the mat, and they say, "We're going to introduce you to the real, living Jesus." And Jesus is alive. It's not just the background sign that you're reading, as you see when we're sitting here in this conversation. Jesus is alive. He's on Main Street in Laurel. He's on East Capitol Street in the city. And he's everywhere where believers let the light that Jesus brings shine through them. But these 4 guys carried the paralytic to the place where Jesus was. And they got there and they said, "The crowd's too thick. Nobody's letting us through. The door is locked." And mere people, mortal people would say, "I can't get there." But these 4 guys had faith. And they said, doesn't matter that the door is closed. It doesn't matter that the crowd's too big. We want to see the light. We want our friend that's paralyzed to see the light. So they took the paralytic to the house. They climbed up on the roof. Where'd they get the ladder from? How did they get up there? They had to cut a hole in the roof because there's no door on top. But they dropped the paralytic in. This is what the new evangelization is. This is what we do in community organizing. It says you meet someone, you're concerned about the quality of their life, and you walk with them so that they could be in a better place. Now you see this guy get dropped in, and a couple things happen. Jesus tells him his sins are forgiven. And it's like every other crowd that you walk into, there are some folks that doubt. They say, "Hey, I'm not buying this. I'm against everything that's going on everywhere." And when you have faith, you speak to those folks too. You say, "Okay, so it is that you don't believe." And Jesus spoke to them there. He said, "You don't believe that I have the power to forgive sins. You don't believe that the Son of Man can do that. But let me do this so you know who I am and the power that I bring because of my faith. I just want the paralytic to get up and walk. So get up and walk." Believers take people to have that kind of experience, and people can see that.
Now, you've mentioned church quite a bit in our conversation.
Yeah.
And we know that church is an edifice, a building, but church is also something else. You and I belong to an organization that says if you take the CH off of each end of the word church, what do you have left?
You have are. And it's very interesting. I like to go back because this one of the things that brought me here is our own conversations. But I remember meeting this guy. I remember Oliver Wilford Jr. from Detroit, who was a little distressed about something that happened in the church in his neighborhood. And when I met him when he came to Laurel, he wasn't Oliver Wilford Jr., he was Angry Oliver.
Yes.
But Angry Oliver came to gather with a group, and I say he came to be part of the church. And it wasn't the place where we were. It was the people who gathered for prayers, breaking of the bread, the teachings of the apostles, and the communal life. And in that experience, I met that living Christ through your own witness and your story about what you did in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And you would say, I think you're that Oliver Wilford that said, I saw the light of Christ when I was with Tim Tillman and this other group of this other group of men. Mm-hmm. But we can take that anywhere. That's not something that's restricted to geography. That's not something that's restricted to people that show up at the edifice in the neighborhood that has Catholic with a capital C over it. Mm-hmm. That's something that we take in our hearts and we take when we encounter everybody that we meet in the course of our daily lives. And that's the thing that we do with the new evangelization. That's the thing that we do when we go and we meet people where they are. We're like the four guys in Mark's gospel in chapter 2. We're carrying people to something that transforms lives, gets them from being paralyzed and lets them see that they have the power to build the kingdom in the place where they are, to make the neighborhood nice, to make the church a real part of the neighborhood, a real part of the community. And that's what we're all called to do. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we slip a little bit.
Yeah. The other thing that intrigued me in our conversation is evangelization and old-time religion. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was a young kid, I used to hear that song, "Give Me That Old-Time Religion." Now, first of all, what does evangelization mean and what does old-time religion mean? Are they one and the same, or are they somehow tied together?
Evangelization and the old-time religion are one and the same, but Christ brings all things new. And I wanted people to think about things in a different way, and that's why I lay that out. But I was doing a workshop at the St. Joseph's Church in Alexandria, Virginia, and in the neighboring Diocese of Arlington. And I asked a question inside of that. I said, you've encountered Christ. What are the challenges that you see in the community? And this group of Catholics pops up and says, the real challenge in the neighborhood today is it's not like it was in the old days. Mm-hmm. We don't have everybody going to Catholic school, so we don't have the opportunity to teach Sunday school in the same way that we did before. And that makes it harder for us to share the faith, and people don't understand the faith. And I was intrigued by the Catholic school conversation. So I said, how many of you went to Catholic school? Well, 60% of the people in the room didn't go to Catholic school. They went to public school. So I asked the question, I says, how did you get to this place today? Mm-hmm. And Janice stood up and she said, deacon, when I was a child, this group of people came down to the playground. They were from the neighborhood Catholic church. Mm-hmm. I wasn't Catholic, but they gave me a snack. They invited me up. They sat down. They listened to me. They didn't talk to me. And I wondered where these people came from, and I wondered why they came down to the playground to see a child like me. Mm-hmm. And then I saw them on Sunday, and I saw what they experienced, and I saw how they acted on what happened in the sanctuary. And I said, I want to be part of that. Mm-hmm. If the church is an integral part of the neighborhood, every child's life is going to be transformed in the same way. And we didn't grow up in the same neighborhood, but in a sense we did grow up in the same neighborhood, because I've been in this conversation with you before. It says, I remember when everybody in the neighborhood knew me, and they knew my mother and my father. There were people I wasn't related to by blood that I called aunt or uncle. When it looked like I was going to turn left and go the wrong way, they told me to turn right. And I thought that that was tough to have all those people looking at me. And they didn't have instant messaging. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have all of these things. But if I did something wrong 20 minutes away from home, my parents would know when I got home. Everybody along the way would know. Everybody would say, hey, Oliver, you knew you weren't supposed to do that. And you got a lecture. You may have gotten a little bit of the old-time religion. They didn't spare the rod, so you may have gotten the rod on the way home. But people were genuinely concerned about every child in the neighborhood. And because of that genuine concern, it didn't matter how much money you had, but you had all of that love exhibited as you walked along the way. And that's what made the neighborhood good. That's what got us to sit in the chairs and in the place where we are today. That's church. That's the old-time religion. That's the thing that's going to turn the neighborhood around.
I always say that our parents had the best communication system in the world. We're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, Deacon Tim is going to tell us what he has in store for the next few episodes. We'll be right back. All right, we're back, and I'm talking with my guest, Deacon Tim Tillman, and we're going to talk about neighborhoods. We all know that our neighborhoods, most of our neighborhoods, are rough places to be. In the morning when I turn on the news, the first thing I see is a drive-by shooting, a hit-and-run accident. There's something that has to be done to bring our neighborhoods to a safer place for our people to live. And Deacon Tillman, as I said, we've talked about the neighborhoods, we've talked about church, we've talked about evangelization and old-time religion. How can we bring these things together, take them in our neighborhood and make them better?
Good question. And we see an example of what it would take to do that in the life of our new Holy Father, Pope Francis. Pope Francis was a guy that took the metro to work if he was around here. So he saw people in the neighborhood, and he was present to them. He was with them. When he celebrated his first Mass, people were in the great square at Vatican City looking up. And he was down at the door greeting people. But the first thing you want to do in the neighborhood is meet your neighbors where they are. You're not above them, you are with them. And go back to that old-time religion, that old experience of church. When I was a child, church, parish, neighborhood were one and the same. Everybody in the neighborhood knew about everything in the church. They understood the things that were valued. There was a great sense of shared value, but there was a great sense that everyone was responsible for every child that was there. And I have that image of not being rich, but I remember running up the alley to take Miss Jones a stick of butter. Miss Jones would have her son or daughter run down with a cup of sugar when my mother was going to make bread. But nobody was hungry in the neighborhood because we shared things in that way. We just need to go back and do that. And you mentioned the drive-by. That's very interesting. The challenge in the neighborhood today, and the leading cause of death in the neighborhood today, is not the drive-by shooter. It's the drive-by Catholic or the drive-by Christian. In a time when we used to walk in the neighborhood and meet people where they are, we drive by and we don't talk to them. We don't engage them. The child that doesn't understand what needs to be done is not bad. He just needs to be taught. Somebody stopped me. Somebody stopped you and said, I don't want you to turn left. There is a better way. There is a perfect way. Jesus says that in the scripture. He says, I am the way. If we believe, then we're called to get out of our car, take that walk, and make church synonymous with neighborhood again. Which means meeting that child where he or she is and sharing the light that we got from sharing our faith. It's a very simple thing, and it's a very powerful thing. It was our experience in life. We just need to remember what we experienced and share the good from our lives with those that we encounter. That's the thing that's going to turn the neighborhood around. That's what the organizing is about. That's what the new evangelization is about. And it's nothing new. Jesus did that from the entire time that he was here, and he was teaching folks how to do that before he was the Word made flesh.
Well, we've been talking to Deacon Tim Tillman today, and we're not done yet. We're not done yet.
Oh, no, this is just the beginning.
He's going to come back, and we're going to talk about things like leadership. We're talk about meeting, as he mentioned in one of his conversations today, meeting people where they are, like Jesus met the woman at the well. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and we hope that you have gained some kind of insight today as to what you can do. All of us can do something. We all have our talents. We all have things that we do good. All we have to do is start doing them. Take that first step. There was a little man in India named Gandhi. His people were forbidden to walk on a road, but he took that first step and changed the nation. We can take one step and change our neighborhood. So when we come back on the next episodes, we're going to pick Deacon Tim's brain about many points. That's our show for today. We'll be back, and we hope you will too. Thank you, Deacon, for being with us today. And
thank you, Oliver. It's good to be with you, and we're going to spend a lot more time together, and we're going to transform the neighborhood.
Thank you.